If you care where Philadelphia is going, make sure you're in the room at the Fittler Forum on April 13th at Fittler Club. This is a full-day gathering built to bring together leaders, change makers, and people committed to the future of the city. It's a chance to hear from those on the front lines, engage with important ideas, and be a part of conversations designed to spark real action. Search the Fittler Forum on Eventbrite to get your tickets now. Little Bean is a new coffee shop. It opened its doors a few months back on Baltimore Avenue. It joins other beloved coffee shops, bars, restaurants, and bookstores. But things are changing on this side of West Philly, according to freelance writer Jen Kinney, who pointed this out in a story she wrote for Philly Mag. As some businesses shutter, what do residents really want in their neighborhoods? We're revisiting this conversation to find out. It's Thursday, April 9th. I'm Trinae Nuri, and let's explore Baltimore Avenue. Before we get into this episode, today is Local News Day. Yay! It's a national day of action to reconnect communities with trusted local journalism. CityCast Philly is here for you to share the daily conversations about what's happening in and around our city. Just like today's episode, we're going to dive into some of the issues that you're seeing around your neighborhood. We talk to people who have answers to our city's biggest questions. We talk about our schools, our local government, the people, places, and decisions that actually impact us, and they shape our daily lives. But all of this takes support from people like you to make it happen every day. And I can't think of a better day to become a CityCast Philly neighbor. Today on Local News Day, you get to vote with your wallet for local news in this community and support the show and the team of locals who make it. Plus, the perks aren't bad either. You get ad-free listening, a heads up about the best events happening around town, and starting tomorrow, we have an exclusive member segment on the podcast. Better neighbors make better cities. Become a neighbor today at membership.citycast.fm/Philly. And happy Local News Day. All right, let's get into the show. Jen, it's so good to see you again.
Yeah, great to see you, Trinae.
I love your article about Baltimore Avenue because it took me back. Because I've been around for like 20 years on up and down these streets. And I love going to Loco Pez during karaoke nights, having lunch at Dora Bet, usually when it's like really, really quiet, and dancing the night away at Dallock when DJ Foster is spinning. And you can catch me at Cedar Park sitting in my chair during jazz nights on Friday nights. And first off, I want to just like figure out what parts of Baltimore Ave we're talking about. What's the borders? Are we talking like Clark Park to 52nd Street?
Yeah, I was really looking at around 40th to 52nd Street in this article. I think that feels like sort of a cohesive part of the neighborhood. Further east or further west, you're kind of getting into a different zone. But 40th to 52nd is really where I focused.
How would you describe what Baltimore Ave is, or kind of the vibe? What do you tell someone when you're describing these neighborhoods?
Well, I really loved the way that one of the people I talked to in my story put it, which is that like Baltimore Avenue at its best kind of feels like this big house that we all live in. And you move from, having coffee in the morning at Green Line, and then you can go have lunch, like you said, at Doro Bet. And then you're hanging out with your friends watching the game later at Dallock or Gojo or Renata's or Booker's. Like there's so many places that I think people feel comfortable enough. You can spend an entire day just up and down Baltimore Avenue, getting your groceries at Mariposa. So yeah, when I describe Baltimore, I thought that was a great way of describing it. It's a place that feels homey, local, Like, we don't have a lot of chains on Baltimore Avenue. We don't
Hmm.
have big box stores. Most of the spaces are pretty small row homes, and the businesses are just on the first floor of those row homes. So yeah, I feel like it feels intimate is something I would say about Baltimore Ave.
Well, what made you actually write about this corridor?
So I live near Baltimore Avenue now. I've lived by it for a while now. And I feel like there's always been some conversation in my circles about like people love Baltimore Avenue. They feel really protective of it. But also it's like a parlor game almost that like even on the infamous West Philly Facebook group, it comes up every few months. Somebody asks, what would you like to see on Baltimore Avenue? And people just have dozens of things on their wish list.
Okay, what are they saying?
They say they want a bakery, they want, a butcher shop, I've heard, more like little shops that aren't restaurants or bars or coffee shops. So like there used to be more of a thrift store on one corner and that closed. So people say, yeah, we'd love to have a thrift store again. There used to be a kids store. There was a Once Upon a Child, I think it was, that was there and that's closed. So people say stuff for kids, more like local wares, things that you could, go shopping for on the Ave. Some people, it's funny, this one is divisive. Some people say more cocktail bars or like a wine bar. Some people are like, no more bars. We have enough of them. A hardware store has come up. I mean, a bunch of things like practical things, but then also like, yeah, aspirational things. I think a lot of it is like seeing that there's a lot of new bars and restaurants opening in other parts of Philly and saying, Baltimore Ave has a lot of great stalwarts that have been there a long time, but we don't get the same amount of like new things opening up constantly.
Do you get a sense that Baltimore Ave is disappearing or things are changing and maybe not in a good way?
I wouldn't say disappearing. I do think that what had been sort of a steady drip, drip over the years of like little complaints that I was hearing about Baltimore Avenue felt like the volume went way up this summer. And I think that was partially because of the two stores that I wrote about in my article. There had been a Jinxed vintage store that closed, and that became a bin store. And then there was a sit down restaurant, Axum, and that closed and became like a counter service chicken place. And for whatever reason, these were like a straw that broke the camel's back, it seemed. And suddenly I heard a lot of people observing the same thing I was that, it seems like actually a lot of businesses have closed recently in Baltimore and across a huge, they weren't all high end stores and they weren't all, cheaper places. Like there was a really big range of types of businesses that were closing. And it just prompted the question, why is this, are they all closing for the same reasons or is there a lot of factors going on here?
And you also ask, why can't Baltimore Ave have nice things?
Yeah, this was the thing that I feel like people were, kind of guiltily saying and bringing up. Like people like they want this, a nicer cocktail bar to go after work, but they feel kind of bad saying it because we do have a lot of bars. We have a lot of great places. Like you can go get a drink at Booker's, you can go to Renata's, you can go to all of the various Ethiopian bars, and they're all great. But there's not that same sense of like excitement, I think, and like a place to go on a special occasion, maybe. It feels like that's something we haven't gotten in a couple of years.
Well, there is Vietnam Cafe, which is like kind of off of Baltimore Ave.
That's true. And Vietnam Cafe is great. My worry in writing this is I didn't want to suggest that we don't have all kinds of lovely spots. But a lot of them have been around for a while at this point. And I think part of the question was just, why not, why like when Axum closed, another sit down restaurant didn't move into that space.
Well, who controls all of this? Like, who controls the temperature of these blocks or who controls like which businesses open up?
That's the thing. I mean, that's what I ended up finding in talking to a bunch of people was, there's not sort of any top down control over this. I spoke to someone in Gautier's office and Jamie Gautier's office, and, he said they're definitely observing this trend, but, they're not approving or disapproving which businesses come in. The University City District, they will advise businesses who want to open, but they're not controlling that property. And I think this is a difference when you look at other commercial corridors in the city. Like when I would talk to people who were just wondering the same questions I was, sometimes they would say, well, like you look at Passyunk Avenue or you look at Frankfurt Avenue and you wonder why Baltimore hasn't had anything near the same type of change that they have. And in the case of Passyunk, there is a redevelopment corporation that pushed a lot of the development that happened there. In Frankfurt, it was more from like private developers who were buying up a lot of property and developing it. Baltimore Avenue is mostly small landlords. It's not primarily owned by any one person. And while there are lots of sort of advisory groups and places that are Spruce Hill Community Association, Cedar Park Community Association, there's not one entity that's making these choices.
Are those neighborhood groups maybe talking about creating something like what you're talking about that happens on Passyunk Avenue, what happens over on Frankfurt Ave?
Not in those terms, seemingly, but they are aware of something shifting. I spoke to the Spruce Hill Community Association, and they had actually done a survey that I cited in my article where they asked people, like, what do you want to see on Baltimore Avenue and what do you not want to see? And the results of that I found really fascinating. And they're definitely listening to people and trying to figure out what to do. But I don't think there's discussions of, and I don't think that people in West Philadelphia would like a top-down solution necessarily. I think that people like the feeling of this is a local space. It's a bunch of individual, local, small business owners. It's not being pushed by, one big developer.
It kind of gives me the feel of maybe like a South Street where it's kind of more organically curated in some ways.
Yes.
But we've got more on this convo about Baltimore Avenue after the break. Jen, how has Baltimore Ave changed over the years? And I'm thinking like the community demographics, the business demographics.
Baltimore Avenue, as all of West Philly, has seen a lot of change over the years. And, Penn has been a big part of that often gets discussed, that like Penn began to encourage faculty to move into the West Philly neighborhoods. We're kind of underwriting mortgages. And so, yeah, incomes have gone up in the neighborhood. Housing prices have gone up. And that has spurred concern, obviously, about displacement, especially of Black Philadelphians who were the majority in this neighborhood until, these gentrifying processes started happening. So there has been definitely, housing prices have definitely gone up. But at the same time, more and more businesses have opened. Like in the 10 years that I've been coming to Baltimore Avenue, like there were far fewer when I first started coming here, and a lot more have been opening. I think one person I spoke to for the article said, like, there was this trajectory, it seemed like, pre-pandemic, where a lot of new businesses were opening up. And then in 2020, that kind of stalled and changed in ways that took a little time for us to see the effects of.
So gentrification, it's been a threat to communities throughout all of Philly, pushing out longtime residents out that, they can't afford the rent or they can't keep up with their homes. And then there's new residents. But there's plenty of neighborhoods that are gentrifying throughout the city. Why have stores on Baltimore Avenue disappeared? Like that secondhand shop Jinx.
Yeah, what I found in talking to people was like there was no one reason for all of these stores closing, but there were some buckets. So like Jinxed was part of this one bucket of, these are like little treats stores, right? Like you don't need to get your vintage candlesticks. You don't need vintage clothing necessarily, but people like it and they like to shop for it at a local chain. Sure. So Jinxed, what I learned is that they closed because of low foot traffic. And I heard the same thing from the owner of Spruce Hill Provisions and the owner of Ceramic Concept, which were both stores that opened up in like around 2020, 2021, and said that at first they were doing quite well. They thought in part because people are at home, they are not spending their disposable income on all kinds of things they might ordinarily pre-pandemic. So at the end of the day, when you need that little treat, you're going to your little treat shop. And then once things opened back up, the economics changed. People weren't coming in as much. They just had a real drop off in customers. And the price of goods had gone up so high because of inflation that it was just harder to stock the kinds of things that they were selling.
But with Jinx, though, which is, I guess maybe something interesting to look at, is that it's over on Main Street in Manayunk. So how is it able to survive a completely different neighborhood?
Yes, so this is a great question and gets into one of the other buckets that I found is that Baltimore Avenue, despite being like our main commercial corridor right here, is in some ways like a bit of a strange commercial corridor. These are long blocks. Some of them are broken up by long stretches of housing. And you're not really, people aren't for the most part going sort of through Baltimore Avenue on to another neighborhood. It's like you have to make the choice that you're going to Baltimore Avenue. And a lot of people just aren't making it a destination. So it ends up being primarily people who live in that neighborhood who are shopping there. And at some point, like we can only all buy so many little treats, before we're treated out.
Totally. Okay, so let's talk about this idea of these vape shops that pop up. Do you get a sense that the community wants the vape shops? Because I know that vape shops are pretty controversial right now in Philly and different neighborhoods throughout the city. So what kind of sense do you get? Have people welcomed vape shops, or have they been kind of like, yo, what's going on? Like, why is there another vape shop coming up?
That's more of what I heard was the latter. And especially, again, West Willie is like a big Facebook group that a lot of people belong to here, and a lot of commentary about the neighborhood happens there. And this was one of the things I started picking up on was people were just constantly saying, why another vape shop? In some cases, like there'd be a vape shop and then another vape shop would open up next door to it. And in the case that I'm thinking of, these two vape shops opened and then one of them closed within like a couple of months. So I heard from a lot of people that they just felt like, one, it's like not really contributing in a sense to the commercial corridor. It's like not a place to hang out. There's more of them than we really need. And then also I heard people kind of questioning the value of that kind of place in general. I quoted someone saying, like, if we had this many stores that only sold cigarettes, I think we'd think that was a problem.
From what you told me and what you wrote about, the community is very active, it sounds like. It sounds like the community is not afraid to voice their opinions and talk about how they feel. Are businesses, though, that are currently on Baltimore Ave talking with each other? And, like, do you get a sense of, is there a community within the businesses?
Yeah, there definitely is. And I know that at various times there has been a more or less active business association for Baltimore Avenue. And one of the people I spoke to had previously been a part of that. And she said, yeah, like she's talking to other business owners. She wants to have more conversations about getting support from UCD, the University City District, or from council members. So there's definitely conversation happening. I don't think I'm the first person to point this out. A lot of people have been asking this question the past couple of years.
Does the experience of Baltimore Avenue indicate anything about maybe a larger story of a changing commercial corridor in Philly, or any lessons to be learned?
That's a good question. I didn't like broaden my reporting to that extent, but I was just noticing as I was walking around the city, like I was coming from an appointment and I noticed that, two side-by-side businesses that I used to sometimes stop in Center City, a kitchen store and like a pet shop had closed. And just noticing bigger economic trends obviously are affecting all of this. I think on Baltimore Avenue, it intersected with like an older discourse around gentrification and displacement and sort of what do these different groups of people who all live in this neighborhood want it to be. But I think you're right that the economic trends of these types of businesses, not doing so well, and small businesses in general not doing so well right now, is definitely not unique to Baltimore Avenue.
Do you see a sense of movement in any direction? Are we going to continue to see stores closing, or do you hear maybe business owners saying, well, you know what, if things don't get better soon, I'm going to have to close my doors? Or do you get a sense like, oh, like, did you hear that so-and-so is going to move into that storefront up the block?
Yeah, I mentioned a couple examples in the story of like there have been a couple great little new businesses opening up. There's like a new clothing boutique. There's like a game shop opening up. I mentioned there's like a chai place that at the time I wrote the article hadn't opened yet, but now is open.
That's exciting.
I think part of what we did see is just the long tail of these pandemic disruptions. Something I was thinking about is like, during 2020, I lived in a place where I could see Baltimore Avenue. And I remember watching as the bank and the liquor store were like boarding up their windows. And a lot of businesses are putting signs on their windows that say Black owned business, to discourage people from trying to break in. And like, it's only been a few years since then. So I think it makes a lot of sense, actually, that we've seen this wave of change happening. I feel pretty hopeful that something new will come in. I do think that there's like an interesting dynamic going on. Like I said something in the piece about, it seems like people are worried, is Baltimore Avenue getting more gentrified or is it in decline? And I think that sometimes those can go hand in hand. Like, this nice new apartment building that people were kind of upset about opened on the corner of Clark Park, and people were sort of seeing it as the symbol of gentrification and how terrible this was. And now it's empty on the first floor, and it's sat empty ever since it opened. I think seeing that kind of money and investment come into the neighborhood but not provide benefits to the people who live there is what people get upset about. But there are a lot of small business owners and locals who want to open businesses that I think I hope that we'll, see a wave of new things opening up in the coming years.
Do you know if there's any like red tape to like get the key to a storefront and open a business?
I mean, I'm sure that there is. Like, I know that when I've talked to people, like there's just immeasurable hurdles to opening a small business. It's really expensive. There's little support. There's not a ton of grant funding for it. A lot of these buildings are kind of old. So if you want to open a restaurant, either the business owner is going to have to invest in building out or updating a commercial kitchen, or the landlord is going to have to do it. And those can be just enormous investments. So I think that's a huge factor, just the sheer cost of opening something like this. And then the cost of keeping it running at a time when, prices are very high. I was really hoping that I would come up with some answer as to like why this was happening so that we could then make it stop, and find ways to support more small businesses to open on the avenue. And I really didn't come up with any one answer, but I think what I found was just how prevalent this conversation was and how many people were talking about it, business owners, customers, long-term neighbors, recent arrivals. It was just like on everybody's tongue, and finding out, whether that was responding to something real or that was just a sensation that we were all having in the moment was really interesting to do.
That's Jen Kinney, freelance writer here in Philly. Thanks so much, Jen, for being on CityCast Philly today.
Thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed this episode about Baltimore Avenue, make sure you share this with someone who lives in the neighborhood. Also, rate the show, leave us a review, and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to sign up for our morning newsletter to learn more about what else Philly is talking about. And don't forget, you can support the show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast Philly neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.